Hearth and Home changed the weapons of Valheim quite a bit, and it also introduced a few new weapons. The patch notes don't really tell you much about what actually has been changed. It just tells that the weapons have been rebalanced in such a way that it should not matter which weapon you choose, as the developers want to make every weapon viable. Is that really the case? Well, in this video I'll be answering that question, as I will be going over these changes and see how they fare. I'll also talk about the new weapons and how good or bad of an addition they are to Valheim. So the main changes that Hearth and Home has made to Valheim's weapons and combat system are as following. Stamina has been rebalanced in such a way that early game weapons will use less stamina, while mid to end game weapons will use more stamina than before. This means that, relatively speaking, early game weapons will deal more damage for every stamina point you used compared to end game weapons. And this is a very interesting change, because it essentially makes early combat easier to manage while making late game combat harder. In addition to this, they have also changed the damage output and attack speed for some types of weapons. So let's first start off with the changes made to damage output, and then afterwards we'll talk about the changes regarding the stamina. In terms of DPS, some weapons have received a buff. Knives actually got the biggest buffs by far, as they have received a huge buff to raw damage now and also have a faster attack speed. Combining those two buffs means that knives DPS has increased significantly. For example, a fully upgraded black metal knife had a base pierce and slash damage of 21 before Hearth and Home, while now it will have a base damage of 37. That's a whopping 76% increase in base damage, almost dealing twice as much damage as before. The increases are higher for the knives made out of the better materials, but for all the lower tier knife upgrades you can find some significant percentage increases as well. For example, a fully upgraded Abyssal Razor went from 15 base damage to 23 base damage, which is an increase of 53% in damage. Next to that, the knives have also gotten faster attack speeds. Before Hearth and Home it took you 2.04 seconds to do a full combo with a knife, now it only takes you 1.74 seconds. And to really show you how significant these two changes are, we should look at the DPS, which is the damage per second. You can calculate the DPS for a weapon as following. A combo consists out of 3 hits, with the third hit hitting for twice the damage. So when you look at the yellow ranges in your weapon's damage numbers, it shows you the range of damage that you will apply to the enemy. And with the attack speed numbers we have for the full combo, we can now calculate the DPS. So doing that for the knife's average DPS before and after Hearth and Home, you get the following numbers. And as you can see, DPS with knives is now actually more than twice as much as what it used to be. So knives got the biggest buffs, and there are a few other weapons that got buffs as well. Axes got the same type of buff actually, as both their attack speed and raw damage got an increase. The buffs for damage are a lot smaller though. For example, a fully upgraded black metal axe has gone from 110 to 115 base damage. For attack speed, the axe used to do its entire combo in 2.74 seconds, and now it has been reduced. It now will take you 2.58 seconds to do a full combo. Doing the same calculation as before with the knives, you can see that the DPS changes for the axes are as following. As you can see, it's not as big, but it's still something. And then we have the battle axe, which in contrast has actually got a nerf for its base damage. A fully upgraded battle axe used to have a base damage of 93, and now it has been reduced to 88. It is faster though, as it used to take you 3.44 seconds to do a full combo with the battle axe, while now it will only take you 3.21 seconds. And then checking out the DPS changes, they are a buff, although it's very slight. And like this slight buff, there are some other buffs and nerfs for the DPS, but they are all very small in terms of values, and I'm not sure it would be interesting to go over each and every one of them. So here's an overview of the rest of the types of weapons that got a slight buff to any aspect of the DPS really. And you can go ahead and pause the video to check out all these changes on your own pace. Alright, now let's move on to the bigger changes, which have been done to stamina. Every single weapon has been modified in terms of its stamina use. Before Hearth and Home, these were the base stamina usages for every weapon type in the game. They were a set amount, and it didn't matter whether your weapon was made from copper or from black metal or whatever. But after Hearth and Home, every single tier has gotten a new stamina use associated to it, as you can see here. The most interesting takeaways from these numbers are that early game weapons will use less stamina than before. However, with late game weapons you will start using more stamina than before. And this trend of using more stamina than before Hearth and Home differs for the weapon type in terms of when it will start costing more than before Hearth and Home. For most weapons you can see that they will start converting to costing more stamina when you reach the Iron Age. And this goes all the way to the black metal weapons, which will have the most increase in stamina usage compared to before. So that leaves the question, which weapons will give you now the most damage for the least stamina? Or in other words, which weapons are the most efficient basically? Let's start off with the bow, since the bow is not really comparable with all the melee weapons. The bow's stamina usage depends on how long it takes for you personally to aim, and therefore it's kinda hard to compare the bow with the melee weapons, because the melee weapons all have a fixed attack speed that you just can't find in the data. The bow has changed though, and from what I can see there are mixed feelings about these changes, because now it will use more stamina when you're drawing the bow, but will take less stamina to hold at max draw. When you play around with the bow, this can kind of feel like it just uses more stamina overall, because usually you don't really hold the weapon at max draw for a long time, so you just mostly feel the big stamina drain when you're drawing the bow. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're using the bow. For all the melee weapons we actually can do a good comparison. You just divide the DPS or the damage per second with the associated stamina used per second. So I will do this for every weapon's best form. In most cases that will be the black metal variation, and I'll do this with the base stamina numbers that are actually written on the weapon sheets. So to get an accurate comparison I will have to set my weapon skill levels to 0 for that. It doesn't matter if you take 0 or 100 for skill levels, as long as you compare all the weapons with the same skill level. This is also because stamina reduction due to higher skill levels works the same for every type of weapon in the game, and just using the weapon's base unmodified stamina gives you the clearest overview in my opinion. Doing the calculations, it shows that the knives might be the new king of Valheim weapons, as it provides the most damage for the least stamina, with an average of 3.29 damage for 1 stamina point. Knives are in the lead, followed by axes, then swords and maces, and so on and so on. It's kinda ironic, as knives weren't that popular before Hearth and Home, but now they have a huge buff to DPS and also seemingly are the most efficient weapon to use in the late game. Let's also take a look at the iron weapons. Weapons you'll use somewhere in the mid game and are the only material that you actually can use to make every weapon with. Here we see that the Abyssal Racer, which is equivalent to a iron knife, takes a step back, and that actually now axes have the most optimal stamina to damage ratio. Swords and clubs are also still consistently up there, having the number 2 spot. For Bronze Age weapons we can see similar trends. Axes are on top again, followed by the swords and clubs as well. Also it's interesting to see that the spear and headgear have a higher damage per stamina ratio this time actually, when you compare it to the knife. So you definitely have to keep the tier of weapon in mind. What we now know however is that for end game, knives will have the best stamina to damage conversion, while for early to mid game the axes will have the best stamina to damage conversion. Now obviously outside of all these values that I just showed, there are still a lot of variables you have to consider for if you're trying to decide on which weapons you want to use. For example, every tier of swords will deal higher DPS than all their knife counterparts, but at the same time they will cost more stamina to use. Therefore, if you prepare well and eat food with in mind to boost your stamina as much as possible, you might still get more profit from using swords, for example. And then you also have weapons that have unique abilities like the Stag Breaker or the Iron Sledge, which can do AoE damage, or weapons like the Frostner that can apply specific conditions to enemies, and you can really use that to exploit enemies' weaknesses. And then you also have the bow that I mentioned earlier, which you can use for ranged attacks, and etc, etc, etc. You can go on and on. So I guess in that regards, Valheim really provides different kinds of playstyles that you might want to just try out for the fun of it. And it's really not that black and white to say that one weapon is the best and that you should play that weapon. But what we now do know is that some weapons are more efficient in their trade-off between using stamina and dealing damage compared to others. Now let's move on to the new weapons that have been added. There are 2 new weapons in the game, and these are the Silver Knife and the Crystal Battleaxe. The Silver Knife is just there to bridge the gap between the Abyssal Racer, which you can get pretty early on in the game, and the Black Metal Knife, which is a late game oriented weapon. And yeah, it just gives you more possibilities if you are a knife enthusiast. The Crystal Battleaxe on the other hand is another 2-handed weapon, which is an upgrade to the normal Battleaxe, and is actually slightly behind the one-handed Black Metal Axe in terms of damage, while also being slower as well. At the same time, it can apply the spear debuff to enemies and has a bigger range, which means that if you're attacking enemies with it, you will hit more enemies at once compared to the Black Metal Axe. Secondary attack is very weak actually in terms of damage, but you can use it as an opener to stagger enemies, which can be quite useful. So guys, those were the changes and the new weapons. All in all, the changes to stamina are pretty significant, and you might have to change your playstyle if you find yourself struggling a lot after Hearth and Home. Knives are the big surprise of this patch. They are very good now, so you might want to reconsider using them as well. The new weapons are not that revolutionary or anything like that, it's just more of the same. The Crystal Battleaxe definitely has a very cool appearance though. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave a like if you did, and also let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. What do you think of these changes and the new weapons as well? And subscribe for more crazy content like this. I will be making more videos about Hearth and Home, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!